Hello, everyone. Thanks for attending. I'm gonna give a couple more minutes to let a couple more people join. Hello, everyone. Thank y'all for your time. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Dominique Harris, and I'm the Outreach and Reentry Associate with Georgia Justice Project. And basically, what I do is help our attorneys relay messages and messaging and help our language, and also work with Ann Colleton on the outreach team to do community engagement and combat misinformation, for lack of better words. And like Brenda has, you can't see Brenda, but Brenda put in the chat, if you would put your organizations in the chat, that would be very helpful. And I would first like to say thank everyone for attending the webinar. Hopefully we can get some information that's very useful out. And I would also like to thank everyone for being partners with Georgia Justice Project and be open and willing to reach out to us about any information you might be confused about after this webinar and just going forward. And like I said, my name is Dominique Harris, and I'm the Outreach and Reentry Associate. And with that being said, I'll pass it over to Ann Colleton.
Thanks, Dominique. My name is Ann Colleton. I'm the Policy and Outreach Coordinator at Georgia Justice Project. So thank you all for being here and reaching justice impacted voters, which is a large voting bloc in Georgia. So, and you all have a lot of expertise in the voting field, and this is our very specific area of expertise. So we're happy to share that with you and happy to also are grateful for what you do and how we can rely on you when there's questions that we can't answer. So this training is geared toward organizations that do voting outreach. So if you're on the call because you have questions about your own ability to vote, certainly are welcome to stay and listen to this. But if you also just have questions about your own voting eligibility, you can also reach out to us separately. Our website has a lot of information that Brenda can put in the chat. There was a 30-second quiz you can take to find out if you're eligible to vote, and you can reach out to us separately as well. So I'm going to go through a little bit about what the agenda is today. So we're going to prepare you to speak with potential voters who have a felony and aren't sure if they are eligible to vote. So we're going to give a little bit of context before we go into the voting eligibility part about the criminal legal system for those who aren't as familiar with that. And then Dominique's going to cover the basic eligibility information, and then we'll highlight some of the common points of confusion about First Offender Act sentences, fines and fees, sentence completion, and the impact of probation on voting rights. And then we'll share some materials and resources and how we can assist you and your organization. And if you have questions at any time throughout this, you can put them in the Q&A box rather than the chat. It's easier for us to keep track of them if they're in the Q&A box. And Brenda and Dominique will respond to them in writing if they can, or will interrupt us as we go, or we can answer them at the end, just depending on how things go. And then we're also going to have some scenarios or quizzes with real life examples that will hopefully make this a little more entertaining and a little more real about how you can the kinds of situations and questions you might encounter. And so when we pose the question, we want you to put your answers in the chat, and then we'll see what people are saying, and then we will give the answer and kind of clarify if there's any confusion. So we're going to be covering a lot of information today, but just so you know, all the information that you need are on these cards. So we will talk about how you can get these cards. We also have a canvasser guide that will walk you through most basic questions. So with that, I am going to pass it back to Dominique to give us our first quiz.
Hey y'all, and there's no pressure on these quizzes, just gauging, basically creating engagement and seeing where we at, because this is the population that we serve, so we should be very versed in our knowledge. So this is the first quiz, and like Ann just said, please put your answers in the chat. any questions you have in the chat, and we'll read off the answers. So Eric lives in Savannah. He completed his 15-year felony probation sentence in 2023, but was never able to keep up with and pay off his monthly fines and fees. He has $7,000 in restitution left to pay. Can Eric register and vote this summer? I see no, 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 no. A lot of no's. No, no. One yes. Who is this? Mary Beckham. One yes. Okay. Gigi, yes. A lot of no's. Dr. Frazier, yes. Susan Parker, yes. So reveal the answer, please, Anne. Yes. Eric can vote. If probation is done, any unpaid fines and fees are canceled. Other unpaid monetary obligations do not impact voting. And this statement is a paraphrase from the Secretary of State website. So we will go over the criteria a little later, but one thing to remember is sentence complete, you can vote. Fines and fees has nothing to do with your sentence being complete. And with that being said, we're back to Anne. Oh, I'm sorry. We got one more. I apologize, y'all. I apologize. We had two scenarios. So Sheila is 42 years old and lives in Valdosta. Sheila has voted in every election since she was 18 years old until 2016, when she was convicted of a felony. She completed her probation sentence in 2025. Can Sheila vote this November? Questions in the chat. Answers in the chat. Yes, yes. Got a lot of yeses starting off. Yes, 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 yes. Reveal the answer, please. Yes, she can vote. Good job. But this is a very important thing. Just like any other citizen, she must re-register. She has to, and the voting deadline, the registration deadline is October 5th. So with that being said, I'll pass it back to Ann. And thank y'all for the engagement.
Thank you, Dominique. So just kind of want to tell you about Georgia Justice Project, because in addition to the voting rights outreach work that we do, we are a nonprofit law office. We're based in Atlanta. We celebrated our 40th anniversary this year. And our mission is to reduce the number of Georgians who are under correctional control and to reduce barriers to reentry. And we do that by providing legal representation and social service support to people who are caught up in the criminal legal system. We also do policy change at the state level and work with government agencies to do any kind of systemic change that we can to remove those barriers. And then we do community outreach and education, both around voting rights and then about a lot of other areas within our areas of expertise, to make sure people are aware of options that they have particularly under the new laws that we're able to get passed. So want to talk just a little bit about the criminal legal system, because that is what we're talking about today, is how to help people who have been caught up in the criminal legal system to get their right to vote back. So you might know that the United States has 4% of the world's population, but 20% of the world's incarcerated people. So the United States actually has very similar crime rates compared to these other countries, our NATO allies here, with the exception of homicide by a firearm. We have very similar crime rates, but we just respond to that crime differently with a lot of punitive measures, over-reliance on incarceration and over-reliance on supervision. So that's United States, but you'll see Georgia is way ahead of the national average there. So this graph shows all the 50 states, and Georgia at the very top of that graph. So this is overall rates of correctional control. And what we mean by that is anybody who is incarcerated in a prison or a jail or is under some form of supervision like probation or parole. So Georgia leads the nation overall in rates of correctional control. We're also number one in probation. That's that dark red burgundy line. But we also have the fourth highest incarceration rate. So it isn't because we have more people on probation. We also have the fourth highest incarceration rate. Again, this is not related to a crime rate. We have the 25th highest crime rate in the United States. So we're right in the middle of the pack. And yet our incarceration and supervision rates are off the charts compared to that. So again, we just are extra punitive in how we respond to that behavior. And because of that high rate of correctional control, that outsizes our rate of felony disenfranchisement. because of the number of people who are caught up in that system. So I want to talk a little bit about, how that massive number of people who are under correctional control impacts felony disenfranchisement. So in Georgia currently, about 200,000 Georgians are disenfranchised. 1/4 of the people are incarcerated, and 3/4 are actually in the community on community supervision, probation, or parole. So that means that they are in the community paying taxes, working jobs, supporting, involved in their community, and yet are unable to participate in the civic process. So that is a problem. We'll talk about that in a minute. And I want to give a little more context, a little history about how this is happening today, and the history of the criminal legal system and how it relates to the suppression of political power. So 1865, the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution outlawed slavery. But there was an exception in that, a loophole that said, except as punishment for a crime. So when slavery was outlawed, right, the entire Southern economic system collapsed, right, because this free labor source that people had no longer existed. But because of that loophole, in 1866, the convict leasing system was established in Georgia, along with many other states, right? That would then basically allow people to be re-enslaved under the convict leasing system to the same plantation and business owners who used to use enslaved labor. And in order to supply that convict leasing system with human labor, laws were passed that would allow for the arrest and conviction of people who could then be leased out to these companies. So some of the most common Black Code laws were something like gathering in public, not having proof of employment, or vagrancy. So that was happening in 1866. So a little progress at the end of slavery, but this loophole undermined political power. In 1868, the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was passed, and it grants citizenship and equal protection to Black Americans. So again, progress. But then what happens? 1868 also, felony disenfranchisement was added to the Georgia state constitution. So again, the economic motivation of the convict leasing system then drove the arrest and incarceration of formerly enslaved people, and then because of felony disenfranchisement, undermined the political power that people could have. So we're going to fast forward, to the 1950s. Civil rights movement, Black political power is increasing, and then the Voting Rights Act is passed, right? Again, more progress. And then what do we have happen? In 1971, the war on drugs is declared by President Nixon. And some of you may have read about John Ehrlichman, one of the aides, and how he discussed later about the political motivations behind the war on drugs. It would be wonderful if the whole motivation was to prevent harms caused by addiction. But it wasn't. There was a lot of political motivations. And the result of that declaration of the war on drugs is the incarceration rate skyrocket. So the arrow that you see pointing on the graph is 1971. You can see what happens to the incarceration rate in the United States. So again, the criminal legal system has a huge impact on political power and voting rights. So our system today is built on that same foundation, right? Slavery evolved to convict leasing, to chain gangs. The same bill that outlawed convict leasing instituted chain gangs where prisoners were then leased to counties to do county government work. A lot of counties still have county work camps where people are working in the courthouse and other government projects. Prison farms today not only raise the food that is used to feed people who are incarcerated, but it's also used to sell to the schools to provide subsidized free lunches. So that those lunches that our children all eat at public schools are subsidized by free labor in prison today. So in talking about this, and it's linked to voting, like every step in the criminal legal process has discretion built in, right? So the police can decide to arrest or just give someone a warning. They can decide if they should charge somebody with a felony or a misdemeanor. They can offer some people diversion and decide not to offer other people diversion. They can decide to sentence somebody on the lower end of the sentencing range or the upper end of the sentencing range. They can decide about granting someone parole or not. So all of these positions are either elected or appointed by an elected person. So again, the impact on voting impacts this criminal legal system. So, all those elected positions, the state legislators, they don't really work in the criminal legal system, but they are the ones who determine how long a sentence should be for a particular charge. And they can say it's a mandatory minimum, or they can increase how long a sentence can be. So all of those, our voting really impacts the criminal legal system. If I'm hoping that those graphs were shocking to you, because they are. And so our vote can impact these systems. So, and Georgia Justice Project, as I mentioned, does policy change work. So we are 501c3, so we don't work on any campaigns for people who are running for office, but we do work to change the criminal legal system to make it more fair. So, and then if felony disenfranchisement is a particular issue that you would like to work on, we encourage you to connect with the Rights Restoration Coalition of Georgia that is working to either reduce or eliminate the felony disenfranchisement law in the state of Georgia. So that was just some background, and now I'm going to pass it back to Dominique, who is going to cover really the meat of what we're talking about today. And so if you focus in on the next 10 minutes, you'll get sort of really the basics of what you need when you're talking to potential voters.
So yes, thank you, Ann. I know that was a lot, but I'm pretty sure most organizations here know that it's also a positive around that number. So this is our focus today, is to engage, empower the people who can vote. Like this first line, 450,000 people in Georgia have completed their felony sentences and are eligible to vote now, but often don't think that they can. Secondly, in 2021, the early termination of probation law was enacted, and that re-enfranchised, potentially has the potential to re-enfranchise this close to 180,000 Georgians that are on probation. And this last one, the 40,000 people that are on first offender or unconditional discharge that never lost their right to vote, but might think they can't vote because of this status that's not a conviction, but they're serving a sentence. So we're going to try to unpack those things. And like I said earlier, if anyone has any questions, of course, put them in the chat and reach out to GJP directly. Okay, and you can move to the next one. So I know a lot of the population that I deal with, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people on this call deal with, is why would I vote for a government, that convicted me? Like that's the first challenge. So talking to individuals like that already have distrust in the system. They feel like a second class citizen. All of this creates voters' apathy, especially with the presidential election being every 4 years. So it seems like we're either losing or winning every 4 years. So automatically apathy is going to be created because who want to participate in that kind of game? A lack of understanding, like I just spoke to, we think elections only. I don't want to say we broadly, but a lot of people think that elections or the important elections only happens every 4 years. So you might not feel like your vote matters, right? And just another more misinformation about their own voting rights. Like, does my felony conviction stop me from voting? Do my fines and fees stop me from voting? Does this specific charge stop me from voting? But all of that is misinformation, and there's opportunity to combat that misinformation. And that's really telling them that everything that they can think about as far as like pertaining their life is revolved around voting. I like to say everything from mandatory maximums to school board and potholes in your street dictate is centered around voting. Everything you can think of, your district attorneys either are elected or appointed. So if someone is appointed, that person is elected. So anytime someone kind of comes to you with this voters apathy, I can't vote or I don't want to vote, there's no reason to vote, you make sure, because I think this is one of our most important jobs, is to empower them that like, no, you need to participate in democracy because this is why this is like this because people are not getting out to vote. People are not feeling like that they're making a difference in our democracy. So just make sure we don't harp on these challenges of voting because this is individual's reality. Distrust in the system, misinformation, voters' apathy, lack of understanding of the political process. That is an individual's reality. But these opportunities, like helping them understand, like, yes, this might feel like this, but it feels like this because you don't know this, or you might not be aware of this. Like, let's try to empower people instead of pouring into the apathy that's already there. And so I think most of us know this using person-centered language. We don't want to label people. We always want to see the person first. So leading with ex-felon or inmate, we don't want to say that. We want to say person with a record, a person convicted of, a person with an arrest record. Like how do we always identify the person first? And this goes far beyond the justice impacted community. You don't want to say if a woman is going through a domestic violence situation, we want to identify that person first. So if an individual is going through a mental health situation, we don't want to call them crazy. We want to say an individual or a person that's going that helps empower people, if that makes sense. And this is very important because I know we live in the United States of America, and it is very important that states be emphasized. This country does not is not governed by the same law. Like states have their individual laws. And as pertaining to voting, this is something that I just learned out, that I just found out, and I will unpack a little more. But apparently no one disenfranchises anyone anymore. But we're just going to talk about Georgia. In Georgia, you don't lose your right to vote due to a felony conviction. A lot of times we think that, okay, because this state disenfranchises or this state disenfranchises, everyone loses their right to vote. I really need people to understand every state is different. Literally, every state is different. And in Georgia, once your sentence is complete, you have the right to vote. So, who can vote in Georgia? Anyone not currently serving a sentence for a felony conviction. So anyone that's not serving a sentence, that means they have not been convicted of that felony. Upon completion of your sentence, your right to vote is automatically restored. You do not need to get your record expunged or pardoned. You just need to re-register like any other voting American. Sentence completes means completed time incarcerated or in prison, basically. Um, Time on probation and parole. We like to say you're done with all your papers. You're not on probation. You're not on parole. You're not on unsupervised status. You're not on non-report. Like, no, you're done. Like you have no probation and parole obligations. That means your sentence is complete. And anyone that has a first offender or a conditional discharge sentence that has not been revoked. It is very important to understand that if someone is serving a first offender or a conditional discharge sentence, they have not been convicted of a felony. That is the agreement that um taking this act or taking this sentence is doing. We're not convicting you of a felony as long as you complete this process of being a first offender and completing the conditions of your first offender status and your conditional discharge status. And as long as it's not been revoked, they can vote. And I know a lot of us like to focus on this, but most people in jail can vote as long as they're not serving a sentence for a previous offense or on probation or on parole. But most people in jail can vote because they're not convicted in it. They're not convicted of anything. They may be indicted on something, but they're not convicted of anything. And if anyone is serving a misdemeanor sentence, they can vote. So one more time, um, I'm sorry. And when your felony probation and parole is complete, all you need to do is re-register and vote. So one more time, anyone that is currently not serving a felony conviction, that means done with prison time, probation, parole, no non-report, no unsupervised status, you can vote. Anyone that's serving a first offender or a conditional discharge sentence, anyone in jail that is not serving a felony conviction, anyone that has a misdemeanor sentence. All they have to do is be done with that paper, be done with that sentence, and they can register and vote. And this is the material that kind of sums up all this stuff we're talking about. So we send this material out, and you can reach out to me or Ann. These posters and these postcards, like I said, they have the material very much condensed. Like it got right here off paper, you can vote, and this poster here you can maybe put into bulletin boards, because me and Ann is the outreach team, and that's why I'm so privileged to train or to provide this information, because we know the more we know, the more we can teach each other, and the more empowered we can leave others. You can scan the QR code if you want. You can go back if you want to give a second and let them scan the QR code if they want. And that the QR code leads to our canvassing guides and FAQs. And we're going to go into more scenarios. We got all of those right the last time. Let's see what happens right here. So Geraldine lives in Columbus. She served 10 years at Lee Arrendale State Prison, completed 2 years on parole, and 4 years on probation. She has 5 more years on probation. What can you tell Geraldine about her ability to vote? Any suggestions about her parole? Please put your answers in the chat. Okay, I see some good answers. Apply for early termination. When she finished her parole, she can vote. Okay. Ask her to contact GJP to see if she may be eligible. Don't vote, but get your family to do it on your behalf. I like that. Vote in my honor. Petition the court for early termination. Okay. And can you give us the answer? So, mostly everyone was right. So, unless she is serving a first offender act sentence, she has to wait till her probation is done before she can vote. But she may be able to terminate her probation early. Go to gjp.org/probation. So good job, everyone. Let's go to the next scenario, Aaron. Jose lives in Gwinnett County. He did 8 years on probation and has been on non-report/unsupervised status for the last 5 years. And he doesn't know who his probation officer is anymore. He thinks his probation is due to expire sometime this year. He would like to vote. What would you advise Jose to do about his ability to vote this fall? Answers in the chat. And if you missed the QR code, we'll be sending the slides and the recording. Check his status. How would he check his status? Put that in the chat. How would he check his status? Okay, contact the local DCS office. Check with GJP for clarity. Okay, give us the answer, Ann. So this number is very important, and I advise everyone to kind of put it in their contact list, because a lot of times it is very hard to get in contact with the local DCS, and it's hard for people to get in contact with their probation officer. Jose don't even know his probation officer, but the DCS call center and email, I don't know if we got the email here, but the DCS call center, someone will answer, and someone will give you some type of clarity about Jose's situation. So great job, everyone. Great job, everyone. And with that being said, I think I'm going to pass it back to Ann.
Yep. Thanks, Dominique. So just, if you have these cards, that call center number is already on these cards, so you can use that as well. So, Dominique covered all the basics. That's everything you need to know. It's on our canvassing guide that you can get from our website. But inevitably, there are questions. And based on the quiz at the very beginning, I think people have questions about fines and fees. So, especially Dominique already also went over, every state is different, right? So, but when we saw people being arrested in Florida for voting because they had fines to pay, that caused fear, right? That fear crossed state lines and it caused confusion, right? It was a very effective tactic. So the Secretary of State issued guidance in 2020 and put it on my voter page about fines and fees. So if you read the full language of that, you'll be very confused because I always like to say it was an example of too many lawyers in a room trying to write a paragraph. And the problem was that they didn't have defense attorneys in the room who know how the criminal legal system actually works. So it says that you have to complete your sentence and pay all fines. But the key parts that are often the confusing part are on this screen. So it says you have to pay fines, but then it goes on to say fines that are imposed as a condition of probation are automatically canceled upon completion of probation. And this is where the very smart defense attorneys that I work with can explain that fines are only collected through probation, the Department of Community Supervision. That's the only entity that collects fines. So a court, a judge, a lawyer, no one else knows if your fines have been paid other than probation or the Department of Community Supervision. So if DCS, Department of Community Supervision, says that your sentence is complete, they also say your fines are canceled. And so if you are on probation and your probation is done, your fines have been canceled for purposes of voting. Also, on the Secretary of State website, on the My Voter page, it also says your felony sentence is considered complete even if you have outstanding monetary obligations, such as unpaid restitution, fees, costs, and surcharges. So again, the focus should be on, is your sentence complete, not have you paid your fines? Because if your probation is done, then those fines are canceled. So, okay. So why are we talking so much about probation? So probation, we're talking about it because most people, as I mentioned before, who are disenfranchised are on probation, not incarcerated in the prison. Only 40% of people who have a felony conviction ever went to prison. 60% have only had some kind of form of supervision. So we have the longest probation sentences in the country. Remember that big red line on the graph, right? We also have these very common practices of split sentences. So even if somebody went to prison, they also have very frequently have probation afterwards. So it's not just that probation is an alternative to incarceration, but it's also stacked on top of after someone has been incarcerated. So, and then Dominique has referenced a lot about non-report or unsupervised status. So what we mean by that is somebody might get 10 years on probation. But after 3 years or even 2 years, if somebody is doing well, their probation officer says, you're on non-report, you don't have to check in anymore. And often that confuses people and they think, oh, I'm done with probation. But that really just means that they don't have to check in anymore. That does not mean that they are actually done with probation. So calling that DCS hotline number that was on the screen before, and maybe somebody can put in the chat, and that's on these cards, is a really helpful thing to find out, am I done, or am I just done reporting, or am I completely done with probation? And also, Nick mentioned this before, people who are serving a felony First Offender Act sentence can vote while they are on probation. And that is 40,000 people. So that alone is a big voting block and an important to talk about. So if somebody does have a long probation sentence, there is this option to terminate early. Again, it's on the back of these cards. If somebody has served 3 years on probation, they might be on non-report, but being on non-report and terminating the probation completely are very different. So if somebody's been on probation for 3 years, they have not had any new arrests, they haven't had their probation revoked in the last 24 months, and they've paid all restitution, which again is different than fines and fees. So restitution, many cases don't have any restitution But if somebody's case has restitution, which is court order payment to a victim in the case, they have to pay that before they can get early termination. But all the information that they need is on these cards. They can go to the website and learn more about how to do that. Somebody doesn't need an attorney to do that, but they can just talk to their probation officer, call that DCS call center, and request the early termination. Just so you know, it's not an overnight process. So if somebody needs to register to vote by tomorrow, this isn't going to happen overnight. But it is something that we hope everyone will attempt to do, so that their probation is completely done. They're out from underneath that, all that. So as I talked about, there's these long probation sentences. Unfortunately, it is not always easy for somebody to know if their sentence is complete. So calling that DCS call center to find out if their probation is done or not can give somebody peace of mind. If they want it in writing, they can request a certificate of sentence completion, but they don't need that documentation. So don't tell somebody that they need to get a certificate before they can register, right? That is just if somebody wants peace of mind in writing, but they can also get peace of mind just by calling the DCS call center to find out if they are done with probation or not. Dominique mentioned voting in jail. So most people in jail can vote as long as they're not serving a sentence for a felony conviction. So if they've already, oh, yep.
Yeah, can I just interrupt for a minute, because I think there's some, before we move on to voting in jail, because I know there's some questions about that. There have been quite a few questions trying to understand the difference between fines and fees and restitution. Okay. And we've also been talking about both, the end of your probation sentence and early termination. And I think those things can get kind of confusing. So fines and fees are the costs that are associated with a case, like supervision fees. Restitution is money that you've been ordered to pay to a victim in the case. Like if it was a theft case, you might need to pay the victim in the case back for the value of what was stolen. So that's restitution. You are generally not going to be able to get your probation terminated early if you have outstanding restitution. But if your probation sentence ends, you completed your 5 years of probation, they can't keep you on probation any longer just because you haven't paid. That money that you owe to the person might be converted to a civil judgment, but your probation is still over. So you can go ahead and register to vote. So I don't know if that clarified it or not, but we're getting a lot of questions about that.
Thank you, Brenda. Yeah, I can't see the chat or the things, so I appreciate you jumping in and clarifying that. So we get a lot of questions about how can I register people to vote who are in jail. So you certainly can. There are a lot of barriers for that. So if somebody hasn't already pled guilty or if been found guilty and is awaiting transfer to a state prison, or if they're not in jail because of a probation violation for a previous conviction, they can vote. However, there's a lot of logistics that make it difficult to do that. So because people's identification gets confiscated when they get locked up, they don't really have access to voter registration forms or absentee ballot request forms. So it's usually going to require assistance from someone on the outside. So we are suggesting that people connect with the Southern Center for Human Rights if they are interested in doing that, just so that there is not duplication in efforts, so that there is some coordination. The Southern Center is doing a mailing to a number of counties, and because they are a law office, they can mail in papers that an average person cannot do. And they can help us know which other counties, other organizations are going to in person. So if you have a relationship with your county sheriff and you think you can get access to the people inside of the jail, please do that. If you don't know the county sheriff, it's going to be probably a heavier lift to get access to going inside, because they're concerned about, they're often understaffed and have a hard time doing that. So, but again, if you have a relationship with the county sheriff and you can get in there, to register folks, do that. Just remember that once you register someone, you're going to then have to go back and assist people with absentee ballot request forms and ensure that the ballots will be received in the jail mail, because a lot of jails these days don't allow paper mail to come in. They only have things on tablets, but not tablets that are connected to the internet. So, again, that is there's 40,000 people in jail in Georgia. So that's, considerable number of people, but there's also 40,000 people on the outside serving a first offender act sentence who can register without these barriers. And there's 450,000 people who have passed felonies, but are done with their sentence who can also vote. So again, just a quick summary. Again, to repeat. So if somebody says they can't vote because of a felony, you ask them 3 questions. First, is your sentence complete? If it is, they can vote. If their sentence is not complete, you ask if they were sentenced under First Offender Act or conditional discharge. And if the status hasn't been revoked, they can vote. It's important to note that the First Offender Act is different than someone's first felony. So it's a specific act. And if they're not sure, we can help look at their sentencing paperwork to find that out. And if neither of those are true, then you ask them the 3rd question: have they been on probation for more than 3 years? And if they have been, encourage them to seek out early termination. Again, that's not an overnight quick process, but that'll help them terminate early before the next election cycle. So, and again, fines and fees don't impact voting rights. And the DCS call center is how someone can find out if their sentence is complete or not. So I'm going to pass it back to Dominique to do another quiz.
Hey, y'all, I'm back. Hey, y'all. So try to get a little more engaging and get y'all to thinking a little bit, okay? So Glenn served time in prison from 2010 to 2015, and then completed his probation sentence in 2022. But he is still on the state's sexual offense registry. He is worried that he will get in trouble for voting while on the registry. Can Glenn register to vote this year? Questions in the chat. Answers in the chat. Yes, 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 yes. Yes, 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 yes. So, answer, Ann. Yes, he can vote. He is done with probation, so he can re-register and vote. Being on the registry has no impact on voting rights. So before we move to the next one, I think a lot of times, a lot of our work is reassuring people. Just how do we reassure people? How do we empower people, right? All right, give me the next one. Okay. Malone was convicted of a felony in Michigan in 2012, and he served 7 years in prison there. When he was released on parole, he voted in 2020 in Michigan. In 2025, he transferred his parole supervision to Georgia because he has family here. He will complete his parole in 2027. Can Malone register and vote in Georgia while on parole for a Michigan felony conviction? Answers in the chat. No, yes, no, 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 unless early release. Let's get the answer, Aaron. Seems that he has to transfer his parole. Okay. No. Georgia voting laws do not allow someone who is serving a sentence for a felony conviction to vote until their sentence is complete. It does not matter where the conviction took place. The Georgia law applies to anyone that is living in Georgia. So even though he voted in Michigan, like we all showed that map, Michigan is not Georgia. Georgia has its own laws. Florida has their own laws. Maine has their own laws. So the answer is no. And with that being said, let's move to the next slide.
Hi, thank you. I just want to point out a couple things about again, we covered the basics, but now I'm going to give a few examples of when you might want to reach out to the Georgia Justice Project if it's a complicated situation or you're just confused. So I'm going to talk about the felony letter, the felony clock on my voter page. If somebody is turned down because they think that they're eligible to vote, but they think they're eligible to vote, but they're told that they are not, or if there's just some confusion. So I'm going to walk through those. And again, you don't have to know all, you don't have to understand all this, but just if somebody mentions, oh, I got this letter in the mail, you say, call Georgia Justice Project. But I just want to make sure you're aware of this so you're not, so you understand if somebody's talking to you about this. So this is an example of the felony letter that somebody might get in the mail. So sometimes this happens because it's a data entry error. So they're serving a First Offender Act sentence, but it shows as a conviction. And so when GCIC, the Georgia Crime Information Center, sends information to the Secretary of State, it shows it as a conviction, but it's not. It's really a First Offender Act sentence. So that might happen. It also can happen if somebody has a similar name to someone else in the same county. That can sometimes happen. But it's also equally as common, unfortunately, that people think that they are done with probation, but they are not. That they think that because they're on non-report, that means probation is done and they can vote, and they're not done. And so they might get this letter because they're actually still on probation, even though they don't realize it. Or they may have registered when they got their driver's license and didn't opt out of voter registration. So that can happen as well. So this letter, it says that if that the Secretary of State office has information that says this person is serving a sentence for a felony conviction, and that they have 30 days to resolve that or their voter registration will be canceled. So it actually says that you can request a hearing, which is possible. But in my experience, usually if this is a situation where this is a mistake that the Secretary of State's office made, we can look at their sentencing paperwork, send a letter explaining why they should have their voting rights back, and that will resolve it without a hearing. But again, so if you see somebody with this letter or they ask you, they say, I got this letter, I'm confused, have them call our office. We will walk through and determine if they're still on probation or if something was wrong, and that we can help advocate with that voter registration office to get their voting rights reinstated. So remember, I said the letter says 30 days until their voting rights are canceled. So you might see on my voter page when that 30 days starts, like if they get somebody registered, they're flagged with having a felony conviction, they'll have this countdown clock that goes from 30 days to 0. So again, if you see that, have somebody call our office, we can sort it out and learn what's happening. And then when it gets to 0, it will show canceled like this. So that's what happens at the end of the 30 days. But it can also happen if somebody has a felony conviction from maybe 10 years ago, and they finished probation 5 years ago, but just haven't re-registered yet before the deadline, it will still show canceled, right? Somebody's right to vote is restored, but they haven't activated it by registering yet. And so it'll still be canceled because that was the last status that they received from that potential voter. So if someone, and there's this bell or alert notifications in the top right hand corner, sometimes if you click on that, it'll give a little more detail about the reasons and the dates that happened. So again, if you see this and people are confused about why it's still canceled when they registered, frequently that happens if somebody registered after the voter registration deadline and it just hasn't been processed yet. But again, we can help somebody sort that out. And then the last thing I want to show you is the non-felon affidavit. So this is something that someone may be offered at the polls if their voter registration shows canceled because of a felony, but the person insists that they should have the right to vote. They can sign this form. That is their choice if they want to. We would much prefer, however, that they call our office and we clarify whether they have the right to vote or not. Because like I said, a lot of times people think their probation is done, but it is not. And we would hate for somebody to sign this form because if there's part that's circled in red saying that if you give false information, you're guilty of a felony and you can be sentenced to imprisonment between 1 and 10 years and or a fine of $100,000. So we would much prefer to clarify that. If somebody votes early and they have a couple weeks before the final voting day, they can call us. If it was done in error and they should have, their status should be active, we can submit a letter to the Board of Elections in their county and have that reinstated. And then the burden will be on the Secretary of State to clarify and declare, yes, this person's voting rights should not have been canceled. They should be allowed to vote, rather than on the burden on that person to sign this form. So if you hear someone talking about that kind of form, non-felon affidavit, please have them call our office. We can walk them through that. And hopefully, like I said, get it resolved so that the Board of Elections will reinstate their voting rights rather than somebody having to do this form on their own because of the potential risks involved in that. So I'm going to pass it back to Dominique. I think this is our final quiz. And then if there's any final questions, we can address those.
And before you pass it over to Dominique, yep, a question came up in the Q&A that I don't know the answer to. So
sure.
I'm wondering if you might. If somebody is on the sex offender registry and the place where they would go to vote is in a school or a church or another place that they are not supposed to be within a certain distance of, are they allowed to go there to vote, or do they need to vote absentee?
That's a great question.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Great.
I don't know the answer. I mean, I think absentee would be the safest thing, or talk to their probation officer or whoever is supervising them if they're still on probation to determine if that would be an exception that would be allowed or not. But I don't know the laws about the registry well enough to say.
Let's do some research
about that,
and when we send the slides and stuff out, we'll see if we can have a more definitive answer.
Okay.
That was a great question, y'all. That was great. So I like that. That was great because that's the point of the webinar, to get us thinking. So here we go again. Answers in the chat. You are talking with Deborah at an expungement event in Macon. She was convicted of a felony in 1989 and has been on paper since 2010. She is interested in getting a pardon and expunging her record so she can vote. What can you tell Deborah about her ability to register and vote? Answers in the chat. She can register and vote now. She doesn't need to expunge anything off a record. You can vote. I would tell Deborah that a pardon isn't necessary. Let's see the answer, Anne. So, yes, great job, everyone. Great job, everyone. Deborah can register and vote now. While a pardon and expungement can be helpful things, they are not needed in order to vote. Let's get the last one, Anne. Dante was convicted of armed robbery in 2027. No, I said that wrong. I'm sorry. 2007, 20 years away. He served time in prison and also completed his parole and probation after that. Therefore, he is eligible to vote. But Dante is extremely anxious that registering to vote may trigger extra scrutiny by law enforcement and his probation officer. He fears that poll workers will see his record, misunderstand his eligibility, and deny him the right to vote, or worse, that he might be reported to the authorities. How might you reassure Dante? Answers in the chat. Poll workers cannot see his record. Poll work doesn't see that. Okay. No access to poll work. This last question is important to me, I think, because a lot of times fear gets in the way. So think about reassurance. Let's get the answer, Anne. Dante can call GJP for reassurance and clarity. Also suggest that he go with a family member or friend when voting so that he has their support. He can also get his certificate of census completion for a peace of mind and written proof that he can show if asked. I don't know. We got 4 minutes. I don't know how you want to do that, Ann, as far as like questions. And this is the way some QR codes to our voting page, our probation page, and how to register. And that is Ann's extension up there, because she's the one that's going to answer those questions for y'all mostly. But do you want to open the floor for a couple questions? And how do you feel?
Are there any that are left in the Q&A, Brenda?
Like, or do we want to like revisit something that we might have overlooked? Brenda, I know you was monitoring the chat a lot.
Yeah, I think we got through most of the questions that we have, and we've got that one that we are going to follow up on. So I think we're good. Oh, wait a minute. We've just got one more.
Okay.
Well, someone had asked about sources for information about candidates. And I know, as a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, we need to be careful about that. Like resources that we might utilize personally aren't necessarily things that we can recommend. Anne or Dominique, do either of you have any suggestions there?
Me and Ann have been looking at this too, trying to figure out how to like get information, not necessarily about the candidate, but about like the job, like the position, like what is the commissioner of Fulton County? What is the job of a governor of Georgia? So really still trying to educate people with and let them do their own homework and going to research these candidates. I know we don't have nothing, but I think and correct me and help me out. I think Civic Center of Engagement, they have like pre-made educational things like civic engagement. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, I would say the first thing, my voter page is a great source of information. That's how you look up whether your voting, registration is active. It's where you can find your polling place, early voting dates, early voting locations. You can also see a sample ballot that is specific to your address is where you vote. And so that will also list, here's the sample ballot, here's who's on my thing. And then you can Google, governor race candidates and find it. But at least you'll know the names and you can Google the two candidates who are up for sheriff in your county, for example, or whatever, and learn about that. So some other people are putting things in the chat about other sources of information, but at least my voter page will tell you who's on your ballot, which is the first place to start, so that you're not just researching everything across the state, but you're researching what is going to be on your particular ballot based on your address.
The last thing I saw in the Q&A was, expressing some frustration, rightfully so, that, we're still in this position, still dealing with some of these things that we had hoped to be able to solve by now, which is very understandable. I will say, I don't know, Anne, you do this the most, that when it comes to resolving issues or people being denied wrongfully their right, when they are eligible, we have found both state and local agencies pretty reasonable and willing to deal with us. So we don't want, and sometimes it's just a mix up of paperwork. We don't want people to get discouraged if they get that no, or you can't register, or they get that letter, because there are ways to solve these problems. But Anne, you might want to say a little bit more about that.
True. I will say, it definitely is frustrating when somebody is like, no, this is wrong. But as Brenda said, when we do submit a letter, sometimes we get an answer that day, like, you're right, this is what happened. They're right, or certainly within a couple of days, that usually does get resolved. So it is unfortunate that it sometimes happens like that, but as Brenda said, we are able to work that out for someone. So please share our phone number. If you're working on a hotline or you get calls or you have questions, please refer them to us. The volunteer canvasser can call, the voter can call. My phone number and email is on this card. So if you give them the card, they can just call directly as well. So we are happy to be a resource. And we thank you for all the voting outreach that you and your organizations do, because as Dominique said, we are the outreach team at Georgia Justice Project. So we're very happy to share information with you, who can then extend the reach of sharing this information with people in the community.
And
Thank
I would
you.
like to say thank everybody again.
Thanks.